Hello, Vis. I've always maintained that the pen and the sword are of equal might. And Nathan Best, a Cairns resident and veteran author, proves this. Nathan is a very successful published author, and he's in the top percentile of Aussie published authors. He served in the Royal Australian Air Force comms and writes novels so realistic you can smell the cordite and taste the dust. He talks about his experiences serving overseas, so veterans and militaries will really find this interesting. But he also discusses the process of writing and getting published. So if you're a writer or you're an aspiring writer, you're going to love this as well. One of the really interesting things he talks about is reconciling the characteristics, the apparently mutually exclusive characteristics of discipline, structure, and creativity. Me personally, that's one of the most interesting parts of the conversation because it goes into psychology and who he is as a person. Look, if you're a veteran, you're interested in the military and services, if you want to learn how to write and get published, this interview will be of interest to you. But hey, from me, let's hear from Nathan Best. Most interviews start off with a, polite, hey, tell me about you. But I'm thinking this should be a little bit different, mate. Why should we care what you write, Best? What makes you so special?
Well, good question, obviously. And I'm generally quite a modest human being, but we'll go with what makes me worth worrying about. So I am in the top 1% of authors in Australia, Australian authors. I'm contracted to, my publishing company is Big Sky Publishing. So they picked up my current series, which is a Damien Hunter series. I'm generally quite a modest, but I've spent my entire life gathering experiences and understandings so I can put it into my writing and give all of my characters depth and a human sort of experiences, and which I sort of pride myself on. I enjoy good, deep characters but also who are human. So I spent my entire life gathering experiences, and so I could do that. So I write in in America it would be the military thriller genre. But in Australia, it's basically the action thriller genre.
Yep. Sorry, if I could butt in, let's talk about those experiences because you are being quite modest. Let's be candid. You're a military veteran who's served overseas, and we know that's kind of impacted. And I know it sounds a little bit trite and cliche, but seriously, mate, I'm not actually being ironic or flippant when I say thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Mate, how has that impacted?
So what it actually gave me, which was actually really nice in a sort of strange way, is I now know what it's like to have certain things happen around me and feelings. So I write into my novels, I write how everything feels, how it smells, how it tastes, things like that. So one of the people who read Battleborn, which is the first in the Damien Hunter series, which is set in Afghanistan, said that they could basically taste the dust of Afghanistan in their throat when they were reading it. So that comes across, that's very, very good for an author to do. So what it also gave me was those parts of writing which allow me to then put my own experiences into the writing itself. And there are parts of, especially in Battleborn, which is actually me. They're my experiences which I write in, and there's sort of two of them. So Damien Hunter loves ice cream, and so I put that experience, and that's actually me. So at the end of my deployment, I pretty well had enough. I'd rotated out of Iraq into Kuwait by then, and thanks very much, mate. That's nice to see. And so I was running to the end of my want to be there. So ice cream was what was really keeping me going because it's sweet, and the Americans would give you a lot of it. So I used to eat for lunch and dinner basically a quart of ice cream. It would always be cookies and cream because that's my favorite ice cream. I was lucky there was only like 3 choices of ice cream. One of them had to be cookies and cream, which was great. And so I would get that every lunch and dinner, plus 2 other choices in case I didn't really like the food the Americans were serving us that day. But I would always eat my ice cream. So I ate, 2 quarts of ice cream a day. So I embedded that into Damien's character. And in Battleborn, he gets disturbed while he's eating his ice cream. Although it's not cookies and cream, and he eats cornettos. Being Australian, obviously in Afghanistan when he's there at SOCOM. So he gets actually disturbed, and that doesn't cut it. He does not get disturbed during his ice cream eating, and I was very similar. And people around me knew that. I was just happy to eat my sweet little treat and be sort of left alone, which is very nice. And there's another scene in the front of which that really introduces the Damien Hunter character to the reader, and that is in the shower. And even though it is a different situation for Damien's sort of side of it and his explanation of it, what it was my first day in Baghdad, and it was like a 16, 18-hour day. And I'd finally had a bit of time to myself, a bit of time to go and have a shower and get sort of sorted and, get ready to sort of be there for the next, however many months. So, and I remember sitting in the shower thinking, what the hell have I done? Why did I volunteer to come to this place? Because it was crazy. It was crazy as soon as I arrived. And it's just a crazy train because there's nothing to base it on. I had nothing to base that on. It's my first deployment and my only deployment. And so I learned obviously very quickly. And within a week, you have adapted to your environment. Actually, even quicker. Within a couple of days, you've adapted to your environment. And so you're just getting on with it. So what I did was I took those two experiences and I embedded those into Damien's character because they carry through. Like, he eats ice cream in every single book. He regularly showers. It's actually a character, part of Damien's psyche, that he showers very, very regularly. And I've just built that as part of his background sort of story. I don't really give an explanation for that, but it's very important to him to go and have a shower, more than a normal person has a shower. And that's just that developing, because when I built the Damien Hunter character, I built someone who is a broken individual. He is not functioning very well. So I used those experiences, and mates of mine who have been through those same experiences and things like that. So I used all of those things and what I saw and watched during my deployment to then embed into my characters as well, not just Damien Hunter, but many others as well. So, and now I know what it's like to be in a massive dust storm, and I know what it's like to have rockets land and, he's shooting 24 hours a day and, eat not very nice American food, but so you eat it. All those sort of experiences and feelings. I know what it's like to be, tired continuously with no days off, and, those sort of things, to wear armor all the time and carry a weapon and those things. So they're all embedded within my writing. So I took those experiences and gathered them all together over, what was a good experience for me. The highs and lows, obviously, as all experiences are. But I look back and the triggers for a lot of things, even though I've been writing since I was 10, in my current genre, you can see within my deployment. So that's where I sort of grabbed all those from.
Wow. And and you can, again, I totally concur with the person that made that observation. Like, you can even feel the blast on your face when you're kind of like, reading all that kind of stuff. You've experienced those kind of things, and you've actually been there and done that. So that really, I know there's another way that being in the military has kind of like affected that. We'll get to that a little bit later on, and we will get through all of your publication list, which is considerable and pretty awesome. But like, feeling a blast on your face, tell me what that's like.
Mm-hmm. So there's a scene in the Damien in Battleborn where the Dutch who Damien is supporting actually trigger an IED, which is an improvised explosive device. And that basically really starts the novel off in, the real action sort of series of it, and sequences of it, where they then start to, interact with the Afghani warlords and move on. So, but what I was also, apart from that part, there's no bad guys in any of my writing. The Afghanis are not a bad guy. The company that Damien works with are not a bad guy. The Dutch are not bad guys. Everyone is doing their job. The Afghanis are protecting their country, and the Australians are doing their job. The Dutch are doing their job. That's it. They all just happen to be in the Chora Valley doing their job all at the same time with different ideology. So there's no bad guys, and I'm very conscious of that, and it actually comes naturally because everyone's, looking after their own country or their own beliefs or whatever, all on their own. That's what they do. So the idea for the IED and how I describe the IED explosion within the novel comes from an experience I had in Iraq. And that was when I used to have to walk about 1.5 kilometers one way to eat every day. So I would walk about 6 Ks a day to eat. whenever I, had time to eat during my day. So, but I always had breakfast by myself. And my crew knew that. They spent a lot of time with me, but that was my little bit of alone time. So, but we were in the L4 Palace complex in Baghdad, and we were in Saddam's mother's palace, which is surrounded by big lakes and things like that. So when we would basically you would work out where the toilets were on your way, which were horrible American portaloos. If you never used one, it's an experience. Our portaloos are very, very nice in Australia. The Americans do not have the same type. So that's an experience within itself in 50 degrees of heat. And then you would have little bunkers scattered around, so you could just duck in if it was incoming or something coming along. So, but I was walking around the bottom part of that lake at that sort of time, and it was probably about 5:30 in the morning, roughly 6 o'clock in the morning. And there's a gouge, and people who hear this who have ever been to the L4 Palace complex and seen it will actually see it. They'll remember the gouge in the footpath. And that's where incoming sometimes landed. And one in particular, which glanced off and actually did kill people. So you'd walk past that every single day and roughly, but that was not the best place to be standing at the time. And at that same time, a truck bomb went off in a market, which was probably a kilometre away from where I was. But the truck bomb was so large that I saw the shockwave coming across the lake towards me. And then it hit me, and then it moved on the way through. And that's how large this weapon was. Quite amazing. And I'd never experienced something like that. But I'd heard the IEDs and stuff going off and, that sort of stuff already, but not of such magnitude. It was absolutely huge. So I used that experience, but also another experience. So I also did, when we cycled out of Iraq and I was in Kuwait at Ali Al Salim Air.
Sorry about the interruption. Just want to say g'day, g'day, Jabri. Always good to see you on there. I would love to hear about what you think. But I'm also, there's quite clearly a number of veterans who are on there as well. Anyone who wanted any comments on there, would really appreciate anyone's insights. We'll keep going.
Which is just near the border between Kuwait and Iraq. I did demolitions with the Americans, and they're quite loose. So they had to get rid of quite a large amount of Bangalore torpedoes, which are really just metal tubes with explosives shoved in them, and they had to get rid of pallets and pallets and pallets of them because they were out of date. They're also getting rid of tons of other ammunition. So they just all sort of put it all together, and they showed me how to put the detonators in and run the core and all that sort of stuff, and that was great. And they're really cool guys to work with. And then we went away probably about 3 kilometers. And they gave me the little clacker to set it off with, which I thought was awesome. To them, they do this every week. So every Thursday they did demolitions. But to me, I'd never done it before, and I thought it was brilliant. So they gave me the little clacker to set it off. And somebody will probably know the name of that little clacker, but I call it little clacker. And you hit it 3 times, and it went off, and it was phenomenal. And all you see was this huge cloud of, the explosion in the distance. And then ripping across the top of the desert was the shockwave. And I saw it coming. It's like, wow. And you do see it. There are some videos on YouTube where the same sort of thing happens, and you see the shockwave ripping up the surface of the desert as it comes towards you, and then it hits you, and it's a physical impact onto your body, and then it keeps going, past you, because the desert's very flat, so there's nothing really to slow it down. The Portaloo was banging, and cars were moving, and that was 3 kilometers away. But trust me, it was a very big detonation. Wow. So I took those experiences, and how I could see the desert being ripped up, and all that sort of stuff, and the water on the lake, and I write that into that ID explosion with the Dutch, and that's actually within a little copse of trees. And when it goes off, that then starts off, the action sequences of Battleborn, realistically. So, because my main character, Damien Hunter, he's a private military contractor, which some people like to call mercenaries. Other people like to call them contractors, whichever, it doesn't really matter. They're all PMCs these days, it doesn't really matter. And he works for a company called Taipan. And Taipan are a mixture of South African and British company, built in the Congo in the 1960s, where the glory days of PMCs were built, and that's actually a real thing. And PMCs like Damien's and Taipan are real. There are people doing this job. And Taipan are a niche PMC, and they only take contracts that no one else will do, or high risk, or slightly crazy, because that makes a great character and a great story to run with. Obviously, it's a little bit cliched, but it works really well. And that's why Damien Hunter, he is not a good guy. He is a PMC, and he's a contractor, and he does whatever contracts his company accepts and his team of, and there's 3 in the team, including him. They go in and then they prosecute that mission, and then they're extracted out, and they are 100% expendable. So they have multiple teams. Like Damien's team is called Taipan 1-6, and that's the 16th Taipan team. All the rest are gone. There's no other. The 15 before them have been wiped out, lost, disappeared, pensioned off through injury or whatever. So, and that's 15, as they started, giving the Taipans the names. And in later novels, they're up to Taipan 30. And the other ones have just been expended because some missions don't go well. And Damien and his team are basically one of the best teams there because they're still Taipan 1-6 and they're still alive and still functional and operational. But Damien as a character is extremely broken, like I said before, because he's a contractor. So he does contract after contract after contract. And before that, he was in the Royal Australian Air Force because that is my background. And he was a combat controller. So for those who don't know, combat controllers are the guys who go in with special forces team behind the lines, and they call in artillery, they call in aircraft, they call in all the heavy weaponry to take out targets. And they also protect each other. They do all the dust offs and all that medical evacuation, all that sort of stuff. That is their bag. It's an amazing, amazing job, and they're very quiet. No one, they don't really talk to anyone. They don't talk about their experiences in particular, but the job they do is amazing. So I call them a battlefield multiplier. And I say that inside my novels as well, because that's what they are. And that's Damien's background. Because I didn't want the cliched SAS or SEAL or, those sort of guys or SBS, that's because everyone writes about them. So I wanted a special forces operator. It was a different tier of the 3 tiers. They're tier 3s, I think, remember rightly, who had all the skills I required, but also Taipan then teach them all the extra skills they require. So Damien, because it's fiction, I have that ability, is basically do anything I want him to do. It's very, very nice. He can fly planes, helicopters, use any sort of weapon. He can drive tanks. He can do whatever. And either he had experience in that or Taipan taught him to do it. He can speak multiple languages because you need that for a story, especially when they're set in multiple different places. And he can do all of those things. But he's also completely broken as a person. He's mentally completely worn out.
That's the thing I like about, your books are quite character driven, I find. And the other thing I like about this is you can have someone who's broken, and this is the depth of the characters. So you can have someone who's broken, but there's no bad guys. So again, you don't get this cliched, goodies versus baddies. There's an understanding that, the line between good and evil runs down the heart of each human being, rather than in a national border or a religious border or something else like that.
Yeah, and that's and also in that cliched goodies baddies, cowboys and Indians sort of way. That only exists in movies basically because it makes movies sell. But I don't roll like that. And even though Damien Hunter, the series is the Damien Hunter series, each book is individual. You can read them individually anyway with common characters. But what I also write in my series, I have a very unique style as well. Is even though Damien is technically the series is about Damien, all of the other characters almost have as much airtime as what he does. His team have almost as much airtime as it is. And the protagonists, there's 2 protagonists within the novel, which is Raina Descent and the Afghani warlord. They almost have the same amount of airtime as Damien does, in a very strange way. So, but I didn't consciously write it out that way. It just became that way. And a lot of people love Raina's character, even though he's a total psychopath, complete psychopath. He's a PMC as well, who works for a Russian rival of Taipan. And that comes out in later novels, and that sort of is explored a bit more differently. So he's an ex-French foreign legionnaire, and I wanted someone with a slightly different background as well. I like different backgrounds. And he became a contractor when he left the Legion because he didn't agree with how the Legion was fighting in Afghanistan. He wanted more because he had moved into that psychopathic sort of world. So he wanted to kill, and and strange enough, that doesn't give him pleasure. It's a tool to the job. And that's how he views life. And he's going from contract to contract. He doesn't worry about, stress or anything. That is his life in that sort of way. So, and people really like Raina, which is quite strange. Because if you wanted a bit of good and evil, that's basically, Raina and Damien, who eventually start to hate each other in subsequent novels. But when their sort of paths, cross. And that begins in Battleborn, where they first meet, and that's sort of further down, sort of, quarter way into the novel when they first meet for the first time.
Well, there is an
personal.
There is an appeal to that sort of person, though, mate, isn't there?
Very much so.
But mate, I've got to ask, like, how did you get an understanding of that kind of character, Bestie? Is there anything you need to be telling us?
No, so I did read a lot about serial killers when I was younger, so that sort of helped me. But where I sort of needed it, my other half started studying psychology quite a few years ago, and if I needed, I would just run ideas past her. But also what it came from was, I used to watch a lot of old horror movies and things like that, and they had a lot of psychopathic style characters in them. And, that sort of, I suppose, rattled around in my head in the background with not really any sort of outlet. And then I just got a sort of feel for Rainer. He was a character that just sort of arrived. I was looking for a character like him, but he just literally appeared in my head and was like, yep, this guy will be absolutely perfect. And he suits that part of the story really, really well. There's not really based on anyone in particular. He probably has those little bits and pieces of lots of different people, and lots of different inspiration for his character. Whereas Damien is built on 5 people. So Damien is built on, well, in part me, but also 4 other people, which I count as my advisors, and they gave me lots of advice and help for Battleborn, and do subsequent advice now. So I'm lucky enough to have 2 combat controllers to call friends, and they are combat hardened as well. So they've both been in combat and done their jobs. So I could take what I didn't know and understand about close combat, because I've never been in close combat before, and I could then take that, and they helped me out and told me where it would all go. And I was like, okay, this is how I built the scene, and I built it on their advice. And parts of them are actually inside the novel. So some of the stories they told me are Damien Hunter's stories, little background pieces and things in Battleborn. You will actually read it and go, which you won't realize, sorry. That is one of their stories embedded. And I did that consciously because I wanted them to live within the novel as well, as opposed to being thanked at the start. I wanted them to read and go, oh, that's my story, And another mate of mine is, sorry, keep going.
So have you seen, with these mates of yours, have you seen them in any actions or doing things or practicing stuff or anything else like that? That's kind of like really...
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so the other two advisors I have, which are mates of mine, which are also embedded in Damien Hunter, are X2 Commando, who's done it for real. Very, very good operator in his time. He's quite a bit of a legend. And another mate of mine who's a medic, ex-clearance diver, and martial arts, amazing. I'm not sure. I can't never remember what his discipline is, but he is a deadly man. Has taught me so many things, and has split my lip regularly when he's teaching me little hand-to-hand bits and pieces. So, but really, the catalyst for the Damien Hunter as the character came to me probably about 5 or so years ago. And I am still in the Air Force Reserves nowadays, and I've got probably a year to go, and I'll probably then decide to leave because it's enough time. That'll be 35 years for me in the service, and that's good enough. I've had some great times. And I do my reserve time with Combat Survival Training still in Townsville. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I was watching a mate of mine who's a great, hard man, and he was doing his pistol drills. And he was just standing off by himself, and he had his gear on, his rig on, and he was literally just drawing, pointing, putting it back in the holster, drawing, pointing, put it in the holster. And he was just practicing how you do weapons drills. And he was doing mag changes and all those sort of things. And it was just very cool to watch. And he was all by himself. He didn't have an audience. No one was really paying any attention to him because you don't need to, because he was just doing something. He was just practicing something he enjoys. So then when I saw that, the idea for Damien Hunter as a character suddenly just appeared in my head. And that mate of mine also has got significant OCD. So does Damien. So those 2 little aspects of Damien's personality comes from him, my mate. And even the way he puts his rig on and puts all of his gear on, puts his pistol in and he checks himself, that actually comes from him. And that's how Damien Hunter. So before Damien Hunter goes on any mission, he puts his gear in. He puts his rig on, all his gear, and he checks himself. But what he does is Damien Hunter checks himself too late before he can go and get something he forgot, because he sees that as a penalty, and he should have done it properly in the first place. So it's a strange, part of that personality. It's like, well, I forgot it. I've got to keep going. That's how life works, right? Excuse me. Another thing actually I didn't mention about Damien Hunter's personality, which I should have probably mentioned on Sunday, is he carries with him everywhere a certain author's book, which I didn't mention on Sunday, which I'll mention now. So he is a huge Matthew Riley fan. And so he carries with him everywhere a Matthew Riley book. And it's usually Ice Station or one of Matthew's very, very, the earlier books, even though they're all brilliant books. And Matthew Riley is a great Australian author. And I wanted to pay a sort of bit of homage to Matthew because he gave me a lot of inspiration, when I sort of decided to start, deciding I should take this author dream and actually make it real. Because he started out independently published like I did, and he got a publishing deal like I did. So I sort of look at him and go, hopefully my journey is, becomes the same as his journey, and become the great, and good selling author he is now. And that's what he does. And although he does live in LA these days, doesn't live in Australia anymore, hasn't for quite a long time. My sort of strange hope is that he will read one of my books and go, wow, here's an author has actually put my novel in here for him. Yep, that's him. Although I honestly don't like his new novel, I must be honest. But it's just sort of life. So he carries Matthew Riley's books with him everywhere. And he reads them. And they're always in his pack, and he has one everywhere. So in Ghost in the Fog, for those who haven't read it, I actually haven't read it yet. I've designed one of Matthew Riley's books to have a little surprise in it, which he carries also with him everywhere. And those who know him, like his handwriting and stuff, that they know that with that Matthew Riley book is something else. So if he needs to get himself out of a little scrape or something, there's a little thing in there for him. And I sort of hope that Matthew would like that. If he ever got to read it, it's a strange little fan thing, I suppose, that I've put in for him. And there's also those little, I suppose what nowadays they call little Easter eggs. And the Easter eggs are all littered all through, things I like are written in, like I've got quotes from Return of the Living Dead Part 2, which is a great, sort of strange zombie comedy movie from the 80s, early 80s, and things like that. And one of those, Trash becomes a zombie. Most people don't know what that means, but Trash was one of the characters from the movie. And when she became a zombie, it was like, oh, wow, she has become a zombie. So that's when everything's gone bad. And that's when the team goes, yep, Trash has become a zombie now. It's all going to go bad from now on. Things like that. So,
and you've got girls too, there's,
and
let's hear it for the girls. You've got girl characters as well.
Most definitely, not so much in Battleborn, but from Ghost in the Fog onwards, very much because strange enough, I was never going to give Damien Hunter like a love interest or anything, but I had feedback from readers of Battleborn to say, why is there no female love interest for him? Why is there no real female characters? Because in Battleborn, there were never really female characters built in. There is one, but she dies, unfortunately. She's the Dutch medic. So I was conscious of that when I started to put Ghosts together. I thought, well, I could probably do that. So Damien's love interest is a French archaeologist, because what I needed was someone who could travel around the world and then interact with him. And he is part of which her name's Grace, because I love two female names, which are Grace and Emma. They appear in my writing often. They're my two favorite names for females. She's basically part of his recovery. So the Damien Hunter series is 10 books long, and it starts with him as a broken man and ends with him as good as he's going to get. And that's in a novel called Resurrection, which is the final novel. So all my novels, I have every single name, and I know basically what every novel will do, maintaining the story arc the whole way through. So, but Grace forms a very important part of Damien's recovery and his mental health recovery, because I explore that through all of my novels, and sometimes he can't cope. He'll be in the middle of action, and he has a moment where he cannot cope, and his team has to keep him going. His team are what is actually keeping him going through all the combat. He doesn't really acknowledge it. He sort of knows it, but he's not at that acknowledgement point, because he believes he doesn't have a problem. But in later novels, he starts to acknowledge that and is on that, the journey of recovery. But what I also create is I write strong male characters and very strong female characters also, because I don't have a gender bias. I don't see gender in general as a person. It's just not something I've seen, and I've always been like that. So male, female, it doesn't faze me. Whatever you are, if it's for a job, do your job. If it's for a character, do the job of their character. That's, you know, how I sort of think in general. But what I write is, especially in, say, Ghost in the Fog, which is the second in the Damien Hunter series, I had feedback from readers to go, how could you have created such, you know, such a female character, which is Asma, who is Tali, who's the Chechen basic commander, and she is his right hand, sorry. And in that sort of society, that is not how it normally works, because they have a patriarchal society in general, whereas female is generally second. But she is a ruthless killer and fighter. So she has worked her way up, and she is now next to the commander, and they moved together everywhere. So, and it was like, how could you have created such a ruthless female character? And I was like, well, read history.
Yeah.
You know, read, the Soviets discovered that during World War II, and that's that real classic, you know, females are some of the most effective killers on earth, because they have a different mindset to us. You know, male and female mindset is different, regardless whether I see different genders or not, but the mindset is different. And she has female, and she has her own little team, and there's females, and they're all female, and they're all ruthless. So I wanted to create those style of characters to, one, bring a bit of balance, but also have a go at it and have a look at it. And I got it quite right, which is very good. And I captured well her journey up and having to fight her way to her position, and, you know, having to do all of the hard yards plus 100 more hard yards that men didn't have to do,
Yep.
you know, in that same society. So
yeah.
So I sort of brought that up as well.
So see, that's the thing. I mean, the way I mean, I love your stuff. The way I wanted to structure this interview is kind of like is to get two things going. So, like, for, you know, people who are watching this because, you know, they're veterans or they've got military service and stuff like that, you know, they're getting their hit. But I know there's also going to be, you know, some authors watching this as well. So we've gone into that character building. We've gone into, like, you know, how your life and what you've seen and what you've experienced is feeding into these amazing, interesting characters. But I want to talk now about the actual discipline of writing. So, mate, tell us, how long does it take you to write a book?
So 26 writing days, obviously, to write a book. Very, very disciplined. And structure is everything. You know, it's basically, that's how I write. So there are two types of writers in basically wandering around in very loose categories. And they are pantsers and plotters. So I am very much a plotter in how I write. So I write a novel in 26 days, of which 26 writing days, of which I give myself 60 days to actually write the novel. Because I have a normal job. Authors in Australia don't earn a particularly large amount of money. There are some that do, like, say, for example, Tony Park, Chris Hammer, who are great individuals. If you ever get to see them at a festival or anything, go and see them. They're great lads. And very easy to talk to, and very happy to talk to you about, you know, everything that goes on. So the only way to write like that is structure. And I'm a very structured person. And so I write at about 1,500 words an hour. Sometimes I'll stretch out to 2,500 words an hour, sometimes as low as 1,200 words an hour, but I can't write any sort of slower than that. It just doesn't work for me. To help me keep pace and work as well, I listen to music the entire time. So I just put my AirPods in, listen to music the entire time, and I listen to heavy metal. I find heavy metal is stunningly relaxing. And I've been a metalhead since I was very, very young. Most people obviously don't think that, but I do. There you go, there's Tony Parks there, which I think might be, I don't know which one that is, maybe Vendetta, and which is his latest one, and obviously Chris Hammer there as well. So Chris is brilliant. He's very easy to talk to. He's an ex-journo. He writes crime thrillers, and complex ones and really good ones. So there's a bit of play for other authors, obviously.
Yeah, I don't,
I don't mind.
And credit where credit's due, mate. That is genuinely incredible. Like getting, you know, knocking something out, knocking the plan out that quickly. That is genuinely amazing, because clearly you've got that discipline, and that's part of your character. You know, just your character, your predisposition of who you are. That's obviously been shaped by your military service as well. But see, the whole funny thing about this, mate, is, you know, discipline is associated with structure, control, insensitivity. obeying rules, structure. Creativity is associated with the opposite, breaking down structures, flexibility, sensitivity, and even a degree of self-indulgence. Now, to me, those traits appear to be mutually exclusive. Now, how do you balance your creativity and your discipline?
Yeah. So I use obviously the structure to write to, and my creativity is when I'm writing. So I have during I spend basically a month scene planning and researching for any novel, because I come up with the title first, and then I come up with the last sentence, and then I write from start to finish, and that's how I sort of form a novel. I can create an entire story and create an entire scene plan, but if I don't have a title, I can't start. It's a strange little quirk in my mind, but I need to start with the title, and I can have other bits missing, but the title must be there because my titles tell you something about the novel itself. So creativity-wise, I can turn my creativity on and off as required, and I've been able to do that since I was very young. And I don't really know how I do it. I can't really explain how I do it, but I can basically pause and restart at will. So the structure of it is just, the scene planning, the research and things like that. And the fact that I will start writing at 7 o'clock at night and finish at 9 o'clock at night. I only write for 2 hours a day. I give myself 60 days to write, basically 26 hours, 26 days worth, which by the way is 66 hours of writing. I keep a lot of stats on myself. But I can turn it on and off as required. So to me, they're actually slightly separate. So the structure, everything is foundational. And the movie, because there's literally a movie running in my head, and then I'll write it down. And that's how it goes. So I use the structure for guidance, and then the movie plays, and I'll just write it all down, and then I press pause on the movie, and I can come back. I don't like to go more than about 2 weeks without writing, because it's just a little bit harder to get started. But after about half an hour, I'm off and I'm running again. So I don't like to go more than 2 weeks.
That's genuinely amazing. I mean, to me, it's like, you got this regimental sergeant major. Okay, creativity, step foot, wait for it. Creativity, step forward, left turn, pen in the hand. Like, it's just.
Yeah, I know, and I can't explain how it works because I just can't explain how it works. But I'm very, very lucky that it does. Like, I can't write to silence. I hate writing to silence. It annoys me greatly. I don't really know why it annoys me because I have friends who are authors as well who only write in silence. They can't have a dog barking in the background. They can't have road noise in the background.
Because
it interrupts their concentration. They look at me as an author and they go, "How the hell can you do this,
mate?" And I got to be honest,
have such a unique style. I mean, everything's unique.
That is really amazing. But like, is there a difference between being a writer and being an author? Is this something we can call there as well?
I don't know. I always call myself an author, not a writer. And that's just a personal thing. I don't think I have a real hard and fast reason for it. I see authors as people who write novels and books. I see writers as journos and, people who write generally for life and tech writers and things like that. So I see that as a writer. People who do blogs and things like this. Whereas to me, authors write books and novels for it. And there's probably someone who has a much better definition on that and can probably correct me, but it doesn't matter because that's my opinion. So it's all good. And I literally always call myself an author. And I did that from very, very young. And I remember even as a teenager, early teens, considering myself to be an author and knowing that that's where I wanted to be into the future.
Well, let's dive into that. When did you start writing? What kicked you off?
Yeah, so I was 10 years old when I wrote my first novel. And on my writing desk, which I'm currently not sitting at due to internet not working very well, but normally at my desk, to my left is a book by an author called Lawrence Cortese, which is called Target Daimler Benz. So Lawrence Cortese was an American writer, very prolific writer of World War II fiction back in the sort of 70s, 80s, was his sort of real big giant. And that's when that style of writing was very, very popular. And he wrote that pulp style books, and they were quite small. They might be 70,000 words or so, and they were easy to churn out. But he's really the only author who I've often thought that I really wanted to go and thank for his influence on me. But unfortunately, he's now long past, and he's very, very hard to find anything out about. There are bits and pieces on his net about him on the internet as well. And I've looked at those things, but he's really the person I would love to thank, because he is the author who actually kicked off my journey to become an author. And that was at 10. And I wrote my first novel, which was probably, 6-7 pages long, but I had little characters in there. It was written in a 10-year-old hand, just long-handed, and it was called Target 500,000 Tons. So and it was literally a shameless rip-off of Lawrence's book. And I still, yep, that's it there, that's it. And I still have that book with that same cover. There was a couple other covers, I believe, and that sits next to me. And I've had that book since 1980, probably 2 was when I read that book, about 2 or 3, in that sort of zone. The longest book I've ever owned. I've got much older books. I've got books, sort of little collectibles from the 1700s and that sort of stuff. But that is the longest book I've owned. It was the first novel I ever read. And so Lawrence kicked my journey off. And then I really just worked, in that short story genre and all that sort of that styles. What I did was I learned the craft, and I wrote my first real novel, what I call a real novel, in about 2000, so nearly 24 years ago now. And I was learning the craft. So I've written in 12, 13 novels, actually nearly 15 novels, sorry off the top of my head, wow, in my time, in the last 25 years.
That really is.
And a lot of those will never come to life, because they are me learning the craft. They're not quite good enough, but I don't accept that. My first novel, which was called Champagne Lady, which was quite weirdly structured as well. It starts with a World War II story and then kicks into modern life in very similar to Clive Cussler style work. Not many people write like that. And I wrote a couple of those, and they were great. But that was me learning, and I could go back and revamp them and all those sort of things, and I probably will in some stage in time. And then realistically, the trigger for me to become a published author, which is different because I was already an author, I just wasn't published. And that's like when I talk to, authors and stuff like that at, author talks in libraries and things, even what we did on Sunday together. If you write novels and books, you're an author. It doesn't matter that you're not published yet. It just means you're not published yet. That's all that actually means. And you haven't taken one of the 2 paths that are available to you, which is independent publishing. So I don't use the term self-publishing, the indie, because you are an independent publishing house when you publish something. And then there's traditionally published. And I've done both of those. So the trigger for me to become a published author was the death of my best friend. So when he passed, he'd been at me for a very, very long time to publish, and I sort of didn't quite have the confidence to kick across that one little line, the confidence to write and all that sort of good things, but not enough. A little author ego, which we all have, could not quite get me across the line. And it was his death which actually did that for me, which is a terrible thing, but it is what happened. It's part of, just part of life. So I felt that I disappointed him. So what I did then was I went and picked his favorite novel, which was called Burn September, which was a young adult fiction novel I wrote set in the Northern Territory. And I'd written that basically in 2003, I think, 2004. That's it there on the left. And then I decided, so it took me about 6 months to put it all together into a form that was publishable. And I never even bothered to try and get a publishing deal through a traditional publishing house, because part of my, mentality as well is I want to experience things. So what I wanted to learn was how to publish. So then I knew, which put me in good stead when I picked up a traditional publishing house, which is Big Sky. I knew a lot of the journey I was going to be on already because I learnt it myself with Burn September. Every single novel is dedicated to Boris, which is my best mate's name, and I'm more than happy to use it. Because if you don't use people's names, then they sort of disappear into the never. So Boris's memory will be enshrined forever now, in the time that, we've got, because at the end of every novel is Siest with 2 dots after it. Even though Burnt September is dedicated to Boris because that was his favorite, and then the first one I published, every novel post that, whether they're my indie stuff or my traditional publishing stuff, has got Siest written in it, and it's not French, nor is it spelt wrong. It is actually a company that Boris and I put together in high school together when we were in earth science. We made a mining company where we probably should have been, concentrating more instead of trying to stab each other with the knives they gave us, and things like that, not paying an awful lot of attention to what we were trying to learn. Even though I quite enjoyed earth science, it was a bit dull playing with rocks occasionally. I although I know people make full careers out of it. It wasn't a career for us. So we came up with a mining company when we went to see a coal mine once, as like an excursion. And so Sayest is Cichos best because he was Spanish and there was no way my name was going to go in front of his. So we sort of cleaved off the bits we thought sounded good, and Sayest is the company we formed. So that's how he lives on in every single book, because he finishes it with me. And the two full stops at the end of Sayest are a throw to my time as a communicator in the Air Force. And only old communicators would even know this, is the two dots mean out. So when you do shorthand things, or when you're doing data, if you didn't want to write out or AR or whatever, you just put two dots, and that was it. And that was the end of the communication. So that is me ending the novel, is with Sayest and two dots, and that is the end. So when I took up sort of independent publishing initially, I did Burn September. I published 3 novels in the first year. So in 2020, I published Burn September, Zark Creek, and Raven's Eye, all within 1 year, because I'd already written them. And so I grabbed them and made them pretty and made them into a publishable form and then put them out. So Zark Creek and Burn September are young adult fiction. There they are there nicely. Thanks, mate. And Burn September is set in Northern Territory. Zark Creek is set actually just south of Cairns, a little bit for a couple of hours south of Cairns, and is actually a real place. Looks nothing like that in the actual novel, because that's set in 1920s and post World War One. And I came up with the name Zark Creek driving past it once when I used to be living in Townsville. And I went, what a great name for a novel. And it rattled around in my head for probably 15 years before I actually had a vehicle for it and came up with the idea and actually wrote Zark Creek. And Raven's Eye, I'd written a couple of years earlier, and that is actually military sci-fi. And that's where I first experimented with my Damien Hunter style, series style, which is unique in itself. So I don't write a lot of chapters. I only write, in the Damien Hunter series, there are only 8 chapters, and will only ever be 8 chapters in the Damien Hunter series per novel. And I use headings to change character perspective throughout the novels. And the feedback I get from one, I actually like that way of writing, because it's one line, but just you've got different, characters viewing that same timeline. And the feedback is that it speeds the action up phenomenally, and people feel the character because they're flipping around a bit, and they can actually feel how the character is feeling at the time, which is great. Which means I've done my job very, very well as an author. So when I came up with the Damien Hunter series, I wanted to go through traditional publishing for Damien Hunter, because that's what came into my head and that's what I wanted to do. So what I did then was approach Alan and Unwin, Pan, and Big Sky. May as well go for the top guys. I didn't bother about Hachette as well. And Alan Unwin loved Battleborn, but didn't think it would probably sell it well, because currently, or when they looked at it, that genre was full. It's overly saturated with authors, and the American market is completely saturated with military thriller writers. The Australians not so much, but you've got to compete around the world. And I was competing, and I still do this day, against indie authors who are brilliant. There's one guy called Ross Sitter. He is an absolutely great American military thriller writer, and I'm competing against him for what he writes, and he sells far more books than I do, because his price is lower than mine, which is one of those marketing things. But he is a great author, and I read a lot of his stuff. So then I sort of reached out, and Pan weren't interested. They said, great pitch, but we're not really interested. And then Big Sky, like, oh yeah, we're sort of interested, because Big Sky are a smaller publishing company. And so it took me 8 months of negotiating with Big Sky before they gave me a contract. And they gave me a contract at Christmas, and I was more interested in my contract. My publicist, Danny, he was more interested in spending time with his family and just wanted it done, but I wasn't happy with it. So we had to do backwards and forwards, and he had to give up time with his family, which I didn't quite understand very well at the time, because I wanted my contract. But he was good enough to give me up that time. And I in the Damien Hunter series, which comes out hopefully at the end of this year, I actually credit some of I acknowledge Danny in that novel at the start. Because without Danny, the Damien Hunter series probably would never have come to light in the way it has. And I thank my editor, who's great, does a great job for me, keeping me on track. And people like that Danny gave me my break into traditional publishing.
Mm.
Because I got a 3-book deal. 3-book deals are not overly common, but I managed to get one through Danny. So I'm forever appreciative of his belief within me. And that's why I grow the brand, the Damien Hunter brand. So, I can try as much as possible to repay that belief that he had in me as an author, but also the ideal, because it is a commercial decision for him, and well, in publishers in general, it's the commercial viability of anything they publish, because they need to make money. If they have shareholders, they have to make money for their shareholders. So
Yeah,
it doesn't matter to be the best author on earth. If you're not commercially viable, they're not going to publish it.
yeah.
So that's why a lot of people go down the indie route. And I sell indie to everybody. Everyone should have an e-reader, and everyone should read independent paper published authors. Because the only difference between me and indie, even though I've done both of them, because I'm technically now a hybrid author, is that I have a contract with a publishing house. That's all it is. In the indie authors just haven't bothered, or haven't worried about it, or don't want to, or haven't been able to secure that sort of contract. Let's say Ross Sitter, no interest at all in approaching a traditional publishing house, none, because he doesn't need to, because he's already got a massive following and he sells a good amount of books a year, those sort of things. So he has no need for the trappings of a traditional publishing house. So you can go either path.
So what I'm hearing from that is, because there is this idea floating around that, you're not really successful until you've been traditionally published. But what I'm hearing is you don't really agree with that thesis.
No, totally not.
And I hope you enjoyed that chat as much as I did. I cut out a little bit there, but not much. It was just the mechanics of being published. Now, Bestie is a really, really, really interesting guy. As you can see from that, his books are available through his website. I've put all the hyperlinks on there. I do encourage you to read them. I've actually read his stuff, and I find him really, really engrossing author. He's really character driven. And the other thing is, as we've spoke about that in the interview, you can feel it. Anyway, got some great interviews coming up. I've got a number of really, really good ones recorded. I'm still always chasing people. So if you know anyone or you want to come on Northern Vibe, make sure you contact me. As always, please like, share, subscribe, both here on Facebook and on YouTube. Thank you all.